How are you all doing, folks? Lockdown again. Lockdown light, but lockdown. In this video, like many of my other videos, I'm going to be asking the question as to whether Germany is the best place to live, and in particular whether Germany is the best place to be living right now. I'm going to be looking at lockdown, the second phase of lockdown, and a particular question as to whether our democracy is being eroded. So is democracy in Germany now being eroded? Is it in danger? Mahlzeit, Richie here again, welcome back, and as I say, I'm going to be looking at politics in Germany again and the situation during the second lockdown, because there have been some suggestions that with the emergency powers that have been granted to various political officers that our democracy is actually in danger. And I'm also be asking the question whether Germany is still the best place to be living during this pandemic. I'm also going to be popping out onto the streets of Dortmund because despite lockdown, I have one very important appointment that I am going to be able to attend, so keep watching to find out what that is. That of course will give me a chance to test out my lovely new camera that I've been going on about recently. Hör mal endlich auf mit der Kamera, das interessiert keinen. But I've got a new lens and it's for outdoors, it's for vlogging, and I'm going to see if the... Richie, interessiert keinen, mach weiter. Okay, well I will be using the new camera outside. What I do want to know from you all though is basically how are you getting on? I mean, how is it treating you? I mean, are you affected? Is your work affected? Is your livelihood affected? Me personally, my work took a big hit, pretty big hit. I mean, I can survive, I'm getting on okay. I'm lucky that I can work from home, what Germans call home office. But it's not all. That's not all it's about, is it? It's about restriction of your leisure time, your quality time, your free time, especially during lockdown. Is it affecting your mental health? I would say we're doing okay. We've got a good setup at home. It's me and my wife and our two dogs, so we've got a little family, and I imagine it's difficult for people who are on their own. Feel free to let me know how you're getting on in the comments down below. As you can see, may or may not be able to appreciate behind me. See if I can focus on that for you. The Christmas tree, the building of the world's biggest Christmas tree here in Dortmund for the Christmas market has now actually stopped. Christmas market has been cancelled since I did my last video out here for you. There's a link to that over here, over my left shoulder. The Christmas market now has in fact been cancelled. That's going to be really okay. It's not going to be really tough. I don't want to be complaining about it, but it's going to be something that I really miss. The mayor also decided, the town hall also decided that it's time to stop with the building of the Christmas tree. They called it what do they call it? A public magnet, something that's going to attract a lot of people to the city. They want to avoid that, which is fair enough. It's going to be tough without the Christmas market. Now, in order to answer the question as to whether Germany is the best place to be living during this pandemic, I suppose you have to compare and contrast with other countries. And I've always said we're doing reasonably well when it comes to comparing to countries like the USA and the UK, and also maybe Spain and Italy. And I think it's correct to conclude that in Germany our health service has not yet been put under the same amount of strain as in the USA, where famously they don't really have anything like a national health service, anything that really looks after those probably most hardest hit by the pandemic itself. And in the UK there's a similar story. 10 years of consecutive conservative governments have really run the health service into the ground, and we've sometimes seen it at almost breaking point. The same also goes for Italy and Spain, where they have also seen major cuts to their health systems. But maybe these are unfair comparisons. Maybe we have to look at some of the countries which you could argue are doing better, and particularly, and I'm going to choose two countries which are on two opposite ends of the scale when it comes to how they have approached the pandemic, but also countries that are very similar in that they are rich countries which are renowned for having very much a welfare state that is intact, and of course healthy health systems, national health systems. And I'm talking of course about Sweden on the one hand and New Zealand on the other. The complete contrast that these countries have is how they approach the pandemic right at the beginning. Sweden famously being known for taking a more laissez-faire attitude, not really applying any strict lockdown measures, and New Zealand famously being the country that reacted quickest with the strictest lockdown measures right at the very beginning, and who now are pretty much enjoying the biggest freedoms. There are very few restrictions now in New Zealand to freedoms. They even opened up stadiums for major sporting events recently. At this point, I'm not going to go into which approach I found better or worse. I really am out of my depth on this, and I'm undecided as to the correct approach, and I'm glad I'm not working in politics myself, because on the one hand you have very alarming advice from the virologists on one side, and on the other hand you have to balance this with life. You have to keep the economics going, you have to keep the economy going, you have to keep life, you have to keep people in good mental health, and it's a difficult job. By all means though, do feel free to let me know what you think. Who got it right? Who got it wrong? Are you more for in camp Sweden, or are you more in camp New Zealand? Or maybe you think we've got the happy medium, we've got it all right here in Germany. Or maybe you think, like me, the key to all this is having a good infrastructure, a well-funded health system that has got all those intensive care beds ready. They're not going to be at capacity anytime soon, because that's the thing that's really going to make the difference. What do you think? Who got it right? Who got it wrong? Do you agree with me? Let's go and see if my appointment still stands for the big reveal. As you can see, the town centre itself is still pretty busy. Life goes on, the market's still taking place, etc. Retail's going to still be open, but we're going to miss those cultural activities like cinema, theatre, concerts, and of course football. One thing I would like to point out though, that many people have misunderstood or just simply not heard, is that the Swedish situation is unique in that they have a constitution which dictates that there must never ever be any lockdown measures in peacetime. So it wasn't so much an ideological approach that made their measures more relaxed. Rather, it's a constitutional requirement. There can never be a lockdown in Sweden without a war situation. So that's one thing to maybe bear in mind when that's being assessed. Now, I mentioned Sweden because despite contrasting interpretations of the actual figures and how well they or how badly they fared, again, I'm not really going to go into that. It's the country that's held up by many of those that oppose the stricter measures, because on the one hand you can see that New Zealand had the largest success when it comes to simply keeping things tight and overcoming the virus and being able to introduce freedoms again later on, whereas Sweden has had the most freedom for its people during the pandemic as a whole, and some people hold that up nowadays as a success. And this ties into the political situation in Germany that I wanted to talk about, because with the arrival of lockdown number 2.0, or lockdown light, however you want to call it, it seems there is more and more dissent, and indeed even opposition within Parliament, within the Bundestag. Whether you are in favour or against the strict measures, or want even stricter measures, there is a growing feeling in society and even within Parliament, within the Bundestag, that the way things are being done is now non-democratic, and there is much voicing of concern about who is responsible for taking all the decisions and how Parliament is being excluded. And I have to say that this video is going to be unusual in that I probably am going to find myself siding somewhat with the FDP for the first time in my life, maybe. Okay, to understand the German political situation, we need a very quick history lesson. And we have to go back, sadly, to the Nazi period, where Germany was ruled by a dictatorship where democracy was completely suspended. After the war, of course, the occupying powers, the Allied powers in Germany, wanted to ensure that nothing such could ever happen again, that there would never ever be a dictatorship in Germany. So they set about implementing a new democratic system in which federalism played a very, very important role, and also the separation of powers. The idea of federalism, of course, was to spread the powers throughout the country geographically to the Länder, so the federal states, even the Kommunen, those are the municipal authorities, so that everything wasn't centralized. At the same time, you have the separation of powers in a system that is broken down into three. We have, first of all, the executive branch of the state, which is the government itself. It's the police, but it's also the health departments. which is very important in this case, of course. Then we have the legislative branch, which are the Abgeordnete, the members of parliament, the members of the Bundestag. And finally, we have maybe the most important branch, which is the judicative branch, which is essentially the courts, who are responsible for checking that the other organs, that the government and parliament adhere to the laws of the land. So nobody has ultimate power. We have these three branches of the state all in balance, and ultimately with the courts checking that everything is all legal and above board. So far so good. But now, of course, we have what practically amounts to a state of emergency, and we have certain organs having been granted emergency powers in effect. And the restrictions, the lockdowns during the pandemic in Germany basically amount to the most severe restrictions of freedom in modern Germany ever since the Federal Republic was founded. And it isn't the legislative branch, it isn't the members of parliament, the members of the Bundestag that are making the decisions anymore. It's the executive. It's the Ministerpräsidenten, so the heads of each federal state, the heads of government, the local Länder governments. It's also the local town mayors, and it's the local health departments and the health minister himself. This has led to much dissent from within Parliament, there are many MPs in Parliament now. MPs, I'm calling them MPs, I mean Abgeordnete, members of the Bundestag, who are claiming their right to have more influence on the decision making. Most prominently, FDP politicians have been loudest, which is where I'm unusually going to agree with them. Konstantin Kuhle, for example, but also notably Maria Klein-Schmeink of the Green Party has said that something along the lines of the success of the measures, not necessarily being against the measures, but there's measures such as lockdowns and restrictions of freedom. The success of these measures depends very much on their acceptance within society, and I think that's a very good point. And also there is, according to polls, there is a majority of the population, the normal population, who are in favour of Parliament taking over more of a role now, having more say on the way the pandemic is handled. So does this mean that the German democracy really is in danger, or has democracy indeed disappeared, like many of the more sceptical members, let's say, of our society have been claiming, that we are now living in a Merkel-Diktatur, a dictatorship under Merkel? Well, no, I think German democracy is still very much alive, and it's very important to remember, go back to the idea of the judicative branch, the courts, controlling everything, checking everything to make sure everything is above board and done according to the laws. Now, it was back in March 2020 this year when the Parliament itself, Bundestag itself, passed legislation to grant the local authorities, the health minister, etc., these emergency powers, initially for a period of 1 year. And we are still, of course, within this period until March 2021. So everything is very much above board, and it is limited, more importantly. That said, Jens Spahn, the health minister, is already talking about having these powers extended. I don't know on what basis, and I would strongly disagree. And this is where I would also support the FDP and the Green Party in what they have said regarding returning some of the power into the Parliament, because whether it's right or wrong, the most recent measures are indeed controversial. There is a lot of support for taking a different route, and I think it's very, very key what Klein-Schmeink said, that it's really very important that society accepts what the politicians decide. And I would very much like, I also don't agree that we have such a state of emergency. This is the long game. We're in it for the long term now. This is not something which changes necessarily from one day to the other. This is based on long-term studies. In fact, you could argue that politicians have failed to use the summer. We've been told for a long time there's going to be a second wave, and lo and behold, there's a second wave, and it seems to have taken us by surprise. That second lockdown came as very much, it seemed to me, very much rushed in, very much looking what are other people doing in other countries, rather than really taking a decision based on the situation itself. And the summer, it seemed everything was rather relaxed and we wasted that time rather than preparing for a second wave. So it's a controversial subject. As I say, I don't really want to go into it, but I do agree that now, with this being a long-term situation, at least until there's a vaccine available, I would like to see some powers returned prematurely, according to the law, before March of 2021, returned to the Bundestag. I think that's all in the interest of gaining more acceptance for society as a whole, because otherwise, if it's perceived, rightly or wrongly, to be some kind of dictatorship, the only opposition to this line, really the only opposition in Parliament, is from the AfD, of course, the far-right populist party. And we also have to remember that next year we are facing general elections. This whole thing, at the moment, fortunately, the AfD has not profited at all from the pandemic. They have rather seen their support dwindle, but they have pretty much done the only thing that they could have done, switching from actually their position in the beginning to now supporting the more skeptical, the corona skeptics, if you want to call them, the more dubious lines of conspiracy theories. And however ridiculous this is, if there is a perceived idea that society is not involved, that our directly elected representatives in the Bundestag, in the Parliament, are not involved, this could gain momentum, and we could even see a big swing to the right and rejection of the mainstream parties, further rejection of the mainstream parties in the upcoming elections. So I would very much like to see Parliament take back that power, but as I say, this is a law that has been passed for a whole year, and Parliament doesn't have the power really to get that back. They have to ask nicely to be involved. So it's a difficult situation. Okay, so we're quickly approaching a final destination. Where is it, I hear you ask? Yes, it is of course here. La Barberia, Dortmund's finest. There he is, Torben, Germany's greatest barber. Okay, that was a bit lame, but you see the point. Certain things are open, certain things that are part of quality of life that even in lockdown we can still enjoy. And for me, going to get my hair cut once a month is one of those things that makes life maybe a little bit more bearable. And you know, at the time of filming this, I've got just turned 4,000 subscribers, so I've got responsibilities. Imagine if I had to go a whole month without having my hair cut again. I have to make myself presentable for you, you know. Big responsibility, this YouTube business. Mahlzeit. Mahlzeit. There he is, the man in action. Look at those skills. Once again, of course, I would love to hear your opinions on it. I don't think democracy is really in danger, even though we may see these measures stay in place, this exceptional law stay in place until March 2021. The danger could, however, come in 2021 if there is a major swing to the right because of this perception that this lack of acceptance of the measures within society. I know it's a difficult time. I know it can be very hard for some people, and people are wanting quick answers that probably won't be available as quickly as we want them. A quick solution to this and a return to normality. As to the question as to whether Germany is the best place to be living right now, can't really answer that. I think you can contrast starkly with New Zealand and with Sweden and make your own mind up whether the politicians took the right approach here. In general, it's probably not the worst place, and really it's just my home, it's where I live, I have to accept it, and I'm very happy where I am. I do think we have a very good functioning democracy. Democracy is always a compromise. There is no such thing as absolute democracy. We come very close to as good a democracy, as good a modern democracy as you can, and it's still very much intact, but also we ought to be careful with it. We have to treat it well, and I would like to see Parliament involved more. I'd also love to hear your opinions, of course. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so yet, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm here regularly with other topics all about Germany, life in Germany as an expat, as a Brit living here in Germany. I'd also like to thank my patrons at this point, the people that support me on Patreon. If you are interested in getting access to the exclusive content over there, check out the link down below. Otherwise, I will see you here on YouTube regularly as ever. Thanks very much for watching. Macht's gut, Leute.